At the beginning of the 22nd century, the world is on the brink of environmental collapse and humanity's only hope of survival lies 85 million years in the past. At this time, vegetables have become a rarity, as the soil is no longer fertile for planting. So when Jim comes home with an orange, his family is very excited. As the air is totally polluted and people live in a precarious situation, the government has stipulated a law that only 2 children per couple are allowed in order to ensure population control. As she has 3 children, Elizabeth has to hide her youngest daughter in a shelter inside the wall so that the police don't find her. After receiving a tip-off, a group of police officers break into the family's apartment and start searching the place. Frightened by the noise coming from outside, Zoe begins to cry quietly and the men manage to find her. Determined to protect his daughter, Jim starts a fight with the cops and manages to knock them down, but ends up being hit by a stun gun and arrested. 2 years later, Elizabeth goes to Golan prison to visit her husband and discovers that he is very ill because the air in the prison is unfiltered. The woman has gone there to inform her husband that she and the children have been recruited to Terra Nova, and Jim says that his family needs to go, because he knows that there they will have the chance to start a new life. However, Elizabeth explains that the government won't allow her to take Zoe because, according to the law, the girl shouldn't even have been born. As she is making a clandestine visit, the woman only has 5 minutes before the other guards show up and, just as she is about to leave, she hands Jim an air filter. When his wife leaves, the prisoner realizes that there is a laser gun hidden inside that mask and realizes that he can use it to escape. After escaping from jail, Jim takes a train and gets rid of the tracking chip that has been implanted in his skin. His next mission is to pick up a bag full of weapons and money that his wife has left in a hiding place and head to Triage, where Elizabeth and her children are. Before leaving, Josh says goodbye to his girlfriend and promises that he will find a way to take her to Terra Nova, even if he has to go back for her. After handing over the bag of money to a policeman who has been hired to help him, Jim picks up the backpack in which Zoe is hiding and takes a shortcut to get to the bridge that the pilgrims need to cross to reach the portal. When he finally manages to find his family, the man realizes that the guards are suspicious of him and hands the backpack to his wife. Seeing her husband being approached by the security guards, Elizabeth orders Maddie and Josh to go through the gate and says she will be right behind them. After his family has secured passage, Jim decides to act and, after attacking the guard, he runs towards the portal. Despite having made it to Terra Nova, the man and his 5-year-old daughter are marked as stowaways. As Elizabeth is a renowned doctor, she hopes that her family will be forgiven, as the villagers will need her expertise in that hostile place. Technology has allowed humanity to create a portal that would take them 85 million years into the past, so it's impossible to predict exactly what threats the pilgrims need to protect themselves from. When they arrive at the camp, the citizens of the year 2149 meet Commander Taylor, who makes a speech saying that this is the beginning of a new civilization. His aim is to help those people not to make the same mistakes that destroyed the planet in the 22nd century. When he is informed of the presence of stowaways, the commander calls the couple in for a private chat and, as expected, after reading Elizabeth's CV, the man welcomes her to his colony, as the woman will be very useful there. After asking one of the guards to take the doctor to meet her children, Taylor makes sure that Jim is not a threat and says that he can work in the agricultural department. While her family is settling into their new home, Zoe decides to take a walk around the campsite and spots a brachiosaurus eating leaves from the treetops, so she decides to feed it. Seeing the little girl interacting with those animals, her parents are terrified, but soon realize that they are harmless and are enchanted by those creatures, because none of them ever imagined that they could see a dinosaur up close. In the morning, Jim starts his gardening work and is tasked with cutting the weeds from the walls surrounding the camp. While using his machete to cut down those plants, the man comes across a gigantic insect walking along the fence and gets quite a fright. After the fall, he gets up and continues his work, because he knows he has to prove himself if he wants to continue living there with his family. Elizabeth is working at the hospital and sees a patient who has a giant leech on his back, so she has to remove the parasite. On his first day at the camp, Josh meets Sky and accompanies her home, where the girl lives with other young people her age. That afternoon, Sky convinces the newcomer to leave the campsite to go for a drive through the forest, after which they end up at a waterfall. After the dive, Josh comes across some equations drawn on a rock and Sky says that those notes were made there recently, but she has no idea what they mean. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Elizabeth is treating a thief who was arrested that morning when she is suddenly captured by the man, and the guard on duty has to hand over his gun to save the doctor. After stealing the pistol, Carter sneaks out and is about to go through the gates when he is spotted by Jim. Before he was arrested for assaulting the police officers who broke into his house, the man was also a member of the police force and was soon able to detect the thief's suspicious behavior. Immediately, Jim begins to follow Carter and manages to stop him just before Taylor is shot. After being saved by the newcomer, the commander realizes that he can trust him and decides to reveal what happened in that place a few years ago. According to Taylor, the criminal who tried to eliminate him belongs to another camp formed by a group of people who decided to separate from Terra. These rebels are known as the Sixths, because they came from the sixth group of pilgrims who were sent to that place. One day, this group fled in the middle of the night after stealing a large amount of equipment and weapons. After climbing a mountain and showing Jim a beautiful view of the city, the commander informs him that from now on he will be promoted and will be part of the security team. Looking down, the pair spot two war vehicles approaching at high speed and Taylor warns his base about the arrival of new rebels. While driving towards Terra, the Sixers are followed by a hungry CARNOTAURUS and try to get rid of it with their weapons. However, during the chase, the gunman ends up being devoured by a second predator that suddenly appears and, on seeing the animal approaching the gates, Taylor orders Jim to take the wheel so that it can serve as bait. After getting out of the car, the man shoots to attract the attention of the CARNOTAURUS, but just as he was about to be devoured, Jim returns to save him and the pair make it safely to the camp. In the meantime, the guards manage to prepare for the attack and, when the gates close, the predator decides to leave. The next problem the commander and his team have to deal with are the rebels who have managed to break into the base, but Emily reveals that she only went there to rescue Carter. Aware that Taylor will not give up his prisoner easily, the woman suggests a trade and offers a chest full of meteor iron as payment to get her companion back. Since he knows that the material is very rare and that the Sixers control the mines, Taylor accepts the deal. In addition to Carter, Emily demands a supply of medicine and ammunition, but the commander refuses to supply the rebels with weapons. After picking up the medicines, Emily and her team return home and, on the way, come across the car that Skye and her friends used to get to the forest. Immediately, the rebels stop to steal the vehicle's energy cells, but are surprised by the arrival of a slasher, who easily eliminates one of the team members. Checking the security cameras, Taylor discovers that Josh and other young people have left the perimeter and stolen one of the vehicles for a joyride. When he discovers that his son is in danger in the forest, Jim despairs and warns his wife about it, so Elizabeth decides to help her husband look for him. In the late afternoon, Skye and her friends return to the vehicle to leave, but soon discover that the energy cells have been stolen, so they can't start the car. On the other side of the creek, Skye realizes that there is a rebel vehicle parked and decides to go there to try to recover her car battery. However, they soon discover that there is an injured man in the car and they need to join him to avoid being devoured by an approaching predator. Luckily, Skye closes the door of the armored vehicle seconds before the slasher can reach them. Now, the next challenge will be to get out of there, as the energy converter of that battle tank has been destroyed. Realizing that Drake is seriously injured, the young woman asks Josh to help stop the bleeding and tries to think of a way to get her friends out of there safely. When night falls, other slashers appear and begin to surround the vehicle. If the group doesn't get out of there soon, other dinosaurs will soon appear to devour them, as this species usually hunts in packs at night. While they are trapped, Hunter finds a radio inside the vehicle and contacts the commander, who is already searching for them in the forest with a search party. The young man tries to specify his location when, suddenly, the predators begin their attack and try to destroy the vehicle with their tails. In an attempt to slow them down, Skye and Josh grab two guns and start shooting, but those bullets aren't enough to get through the dinosaur's scaly skin. Luckily, the youngsters manage to scare the creatures away with the sound of the gunshots. However, the radio transmission is interrupted and they can no longer communicate with the commander. At this point, Tasha decides it's time to escape before the monsters return and her friends are unable to stop her from getting out of the vehicle. As the young woman runs aimlessly through the forest, a slasher appears and attacks her, but luckily she manages to survive and is found by the search team. Seeing his daughter seriously injured, Guzman tries to calm her down while Elizabeth carries out the first aid protocol. With Tasha's help, Taylor finds out where the other kids are and goes after them. Suddenly, the slashers return to continue their attack and, after ripping off one of the vehicle's doors, the creature captures Hunter, dragging the young man out of the vehicle by the leg. Immediately, the young man's friends go out to save him and start shooting at the monster. When the dinosaur escapes, they help Hunter up and run to the vehicle they used to get to the forest. While Max and Josh install the energy cells back in the car, Skye is in charge of covering the team, but ends up running out of ammunition. At that moment, Max is attacked and the youngsters are surrounded by the gang, who sneak up on them to devour them. However, before they could be attacked, the commander appeared with his team and used night vision goggles to pursue the slashers. During the rescue, the guards split up to keep the predators at bay while Skye and her friends get into the vehicle. Seeing one of those creatures approaching his son, Jim orders him to duck and manages to hit the dinosaur squarely. When the slashers leave, Taylor and Jim go after Jake, intending to take him to the camp for medical attention, but when they check the battle tank, they realize that the rebel has escaped. After the rescue, the teams return to the camp and Elizabeth is relieved to see her son alive. After dinner, Jim and his family go out to look at the sky and are delighted to see a full moon, because in 2149 the air is so polluted that it's impossible to see the sky. That early morning, a group of soldiers is transporting supplies to Outpost 3 when they suddenly realize that the vehicle's tire has gone flat. When the men go out to solve the problem, they end up being surrounded by a group of animals who are watching them from the treetops and become the victims of an attack. In the morning, Alicia takes the young newcomers to the camp to take part in survival training and teaches them what they need to do if they get lost in the forest. After taking the young people back to the camp, the woman accompanies the commander on a mission to find the guards who have disappeared, as they should have returned to Terra Nova by now. In a short time, Jim became one of Taylor's most trusted soldiers, so the man also recruited him for this mission. When the team finally manages to find the missing guards, they realize that they have been gruesomely eliminated and have had their eyes removed. In an attempt to find out what kind of animal attacked them, the soldiers decide to take the bodies back to camp and Jim asks his wife to help with the analysis. With the help of Malcolm, her co-worker, Elizabeth manages to gather some information that will help the guards identify these predators. According to her, the bites and the method of attack do not coincide with any of the species that have already been cataloged in the database, which means that they are dealing with a creature that has never been seen in that region. During the night, while he is in the bedroom with his wife, Jim hears a frightening sound coming from outside and goes out to investigate what it is. Just then, he and Josh come across a group of prehistoric birds and start throwing some stones to scare them away, but they end up being chased and have to run for cover. After being bitten trying to fend off those animals, Jim realizes that they may have been the ones who eliminated the soldiers. After being alerted to the existence of these pterosaurs, Malcolm suggests that a research team be sent into the field to observe them and find out what is causing these attacks, as small animals don't usually attack unless they feel threatened. However, Taylor does not agree with this strategy and states that all agents are forbidden to leave the complex until a way to stop the creatures is discovered. A few hours later, while walking around the fair with Sky, Josh spots the same birds that attacked him the night before gathered around the bars of the wall. Now, however, these animals are in a much larger pack and are starting to attack humans for no apparent reason. The couple quickly run and hide under the table in search of shelter, as do all the other people in the place. A few minutes later, the flock leaves and, luckily, of the 36 people who were injured, all survived. When he finds the body of one of those animals, Malcolm decides to take it to be studied in the laboratory and shares his theory as to why they are attacking. According to the researcher, these creatures are migrating, which is why they have never been seen in the region. The bad news is that, if this theory is right, an even greater number of these pterodactyls are coming, which means that new attacks will soon take place. After scanning the perimeter with aerial cameras and activating the heat sensor, Taylor and his team discover that there are millions of these birds hiding under the treetops. According to Alicia, 3 years ago the exploration team found eggshells there, but as there was no sign of animal life nearby, they decided it would be a good place to build Terra Nova. As the eggshells served as nutrients for the soil, the ground there is extremely fertile and this was one of the reasons why Taylor considered it a good place to set up camp. What nobody imagined at the time was that the area could be the nest of some animal species. Upon hearing this account, Malcolm comes to the conclusion that those pterodactyls are attacking because they consider humans to be intruders, since they are occupying the place where they usually lay their eggs. Knowing that new attacks are coming, Taylor orders Alicia to spread a communique and tell the civilians to take shelter in their homes. To find out how to repel these animals, Malcolm and Elizabeth need a couple of that species, but these animals have to be alive so that the scientists can study their physiology. In the company of Jim, Taylor goes on the hunt and manages to collect the specimens, which are immediately sent to the laboratory. After some research, Elizabeth and Malcolm discover that they can use the pheromones of these animals to attract them to another location, since it is this substance that regulates the spawning instinct. While the scientists synthesize 50 liters of pheromone, Jim prepares the transport that will be used to take the substance away from the camp. At this very moment, the camp is being invaded by a flock of dinosaurs trying to get into the residents' houses. Despite all the doors and windows being locked, the pterodactyls manage to break into Jim and Elizabeth's house and attack Mark, who was on guard to protect the youngsters. In an attempt to escape the attack, Josh orders everyone to run to Maddie's room, but Zoe is paralyzed with fear and ends up hiding under the table. Seeing his little sister in trouble, Josh runs into the kitchen to rescue her and takes the girl into the bedroom with the others. After placing the synthesized pheromone inside the drum, Taylor carries it out of the city and is followed by the animals, who are attracted to the smell. In the morning, all the inhabitants of Terra Nova return to their normal activities, but Elizabeth is worried about her husband, who has not yet returned from his mission. When she finally sees the vehicle approaching the gates, the woman feels relieved and runs into Jim's arms. When asked about the success of the mission, the commander says that the pterodactyls are now in the mountains and have adopted this place as their new home. During field research, a scientist observes the insects that live in that part of the jungle and leaves his laboratory in search of a beetle that has managed to escape. However, when he arrives outside, Jonathan comes across a carnotaur and is enchanted by it, so he ends up being devoured. 3 days later, when he realizes that he is no longer able to communicate with the scientist, Taylor decides to go and check that everything is all right with him, and Elizabeth accompanies him to make a report. When they get there, the team realizes that the perimeter has been breached and enters the laboratory to begin their investigation. While walking around the place, the commander finds a room full of patients with some kind of dissociative disorder. Although they are healthy and have normal vital signs, none of them have any idea where they are, as they have lost all their memories of the last few years. Watching a recording that Dr. Jonathan made before he was devoured, Elizabeth discovers that there is some pathogenic element behind that collective amnesia. So she decides to continue the research to ensure that her team doesn't end up being exposed to the same pathogen and suffer the same symptoms. According to Taylor, the team won't return to the city until Elizabeth finds out what's going on, because the commander doesn't want to risk exposing the entire colony to the disease. The next morning, Jim goes to see Alicia to find out why his wife hasn't returned yet and discovers that Outpost 3 is on lockdown. The night before, the commander contacted us to inform them of a possible pathogen, so no one should go there to avoid the risk of being contaminated. When he learns that Elizabeth may be in danger, Jim immediately decides to go after her and borrows Malcolm's vehicle, but the scientist decides to go with him. On arriving at Outpost 3, the pair come across 2 dinosaurs trying to devour the cables that supply power to the base, but the men manage to scare them off and go through the gate. As they know the place is contaminated, they use air filters to protect themselves, and Jim ends up being attacked by his wife, as the woman doesn't remember him. However, she remembers Malcolm, having studied with him years ago at medical school. Seeing Elizabeth embracing another man after attacking him, Jim feels confused and tries to understand what is going on. After a brief conversation with his coworker, Malcolm realizes that she has lost her memory of the last 20 years and thinks she is still at university. After reading his coworker's notes, the scientist discovers that she has been exposed to a pathogen that causes amnesia and enlists Elizabeth's help to find a cure. Just then, Jim hears a noise coming from inside the base and decides to search the place to make sure there is no threat lurking there. However, during the search, he ends up meeting Commander Taylor, who breaks into the hideout and takes the policeman prisoner because he believes he is still an undercover agent. After striking down his supposed enemy, Taylor sets off for Terra Nova with the mission of rescuing his wife, and Jim returns to the laboratory to tell them what has happened. The team is dealing with an even bigger problem now, because if they reach the colony, the commander could infect all the residents. As communication from Outpost 3 has been cut off, Jim is unable to contact Alicia to inform her of what has happened, so the scientists need to hurry to get the cure before it's too late. He then asks Malcolm to help him get the man to the infirmary, as he found him collapsed at the back of the laboratory. Once there, the doctor begins to show the first symptoms of amnesia and wonders why he is dragging that body around. Suddenly, a dinosaur appears and Jim locks himself and Malcolm inside a room to make sure it can't reach them. After creating a lure to attract the creature, the policeman manages to lock it up and has to knock out Malcolm as the man starts to freak out. Just then, Elizabeth appears and Jim says he had no other choice. Unlike Malcolm, the policeman hasn't shown any symptoms since he was exposed to the pathogen, which means there's something making his body immune to it. After hacking into the computers, Jim and Elizabeth discover that one of the scientists working at the base was conducting a genetic experiment clandestinely and accidentally released a pathogen capable of causing amnesia into the air. Suddenly, Jim starts sneezing and reveals that he has a cold, so Elizabeth soon realizes that this is why he hasn't been affected. The doctor believes that the pathogen causing the cold is blocking what causes memory loss, and, from this, she has been able to create an antidote. The next morning, when she arrives in Terra Nova, Elizabeth discovers that the commander has been captured while trying to break into the camp and uses the compound she developed during the night to help him recover his memories. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.